And now, from beyond our dimension, this is the JeffMara podcast. Here's Jeff.
My guest is Geo Turner, television producer and director, fantasy novelist, and now he is writing about UFOs and more with his new book, UFO Science, Secret New Physics, Vehicles, and UAPs. Geo, thank you for joining me today and welcome.
Feel free to call me Gary.
All right, sounds good to me. Gary, what inspired you to make that leap from fantasy novels into UFOs?
So I've been trying to break through with different creative IP, intellectual products over the years. And at one point I had a published graphic novel series and was pitching that around to different animation studios. And over time, I came to realize that independent publishing might be the smoother route for me to have my creative outlet without all the gatekeeping going on. So I decided to take a stab at writing some fantasy adventure novels that were like sword and sorcery. And I'm having some success in that neighborhood. But then in 2017, when I was deep into my novel writing, you might be familiar with that year, is a little bit pivotal with the New York Times. Their article came out and it really hit me like a sledgehammer.
Mm-hmm.
Previous to that, I had read other nonfiction books, and one that had kind of connected with me had basically dismissed the entire topic of extraterrestrial life. And they had approached it in a scientific, objective manner, and I couldn't really refute the logic in what this author had published. And so I felt personally that the science was at that moment settled. But then when Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal came out with their article and the video surfaced, it kind of broke that paradigm in my mind. And I couldn't help but just, okay, this is new information. I have to be open to change my mindset. And I began to explore the information as it filtered out over the next couple of years. And then by the end of last year, I had finally reached a conclusion of my last novel, and I felt I really wanted to explore this. I had seen so much scientific research, followed so many different theories, and made connections with different physicists that I realized that there was an opening that wasn't being filled. And that was, no one had taken the time to take all of these intense, heady concepts in physics that were being bandied about in different, like Theories of Everything podcast interviewed Salvatore Pais as well as others. And I wanted to take all of their information and culminate it into a handy guidebook. Because people have been led to believe that what the standard is extraterrestrials or ultra-terrestrials or temporal whatevers, none of them could come here because of the limitations of Einstein general relativity as we understand it. It's impossible. But if you speak with physicists, they will explain to you that it's actually not impossible. And I wanted to take that and boilerplate it down for a layman to understand that, open your mind, understand. At one point we thought if God wanted man to fly, we would have given him wings. And now we fly every day. It's just that we need to leave behind that old locked in mindset and understand that the curvature of space-time isn't as fixed as we have it in our minds.
Can you share with my audience the science that you previously believed, and then what new information you learned that changed your mind?
I look in this book at 4 or 5 different theories on the topic, and I delve down deep into the quantum mechanics. Uh, I should probably state that I don't have a degree in science. I went to college and got a degree in the creative arts, which has led me into television and what have you. But I've always had a fascination with physics. And at that time, when I was young and dumb, I didn't think there was any money to be made in physics. So I was like, oh, I'm going to follow where the money goes. And but all throughout college, I did take physics classes as an elective. So I have a handle and can kind of thread that line between their high-end mindset and for all of us other people that have our coffees at Starbucks or what have you. So as I was listening and comprehending and juggling with all those concepts in my mind, I realized that so much of it was difficult to grasp and make concise at the same time. So I wanted to fill that role to try and make it more understandable. And the thing I also noticed, because no one had put together a compendium of these theories before, is that as I understood each one, almost all of them delved into the same region of physics. So Salvatore Pais was working on his, and it boiled down to the quantum foam on a subatomic level and virtual particles, and as well as several of the other theories also hit into that same location. So independent physicists were all dovetailing into the same space. And that really brought a lot of credence to that whole mindset.
I think most scientists will say that we can't travel faster than speed of light. So, in your opinion, do you think these ships can make it here through wormholes or some other conscious realm?
So the speed of light is that standard speed limit. And that's what most everybody walking the streets today understands. For example, like the Milky Way galaxy is 150 to 200,000 light years across, meaning it takes 150 to 200,000 light years for light to travel from one end of the galaxy to the other. So naturally, you would conclude it's just not possible. But that's thinking in an old mindset. That's like, saying you can't get on a naval vessel and fly to the moon. No, of course not. Because if you're 300, 400 years ago, that's the best that you understand how to travel around your world. But if you can alter through gravity, you can alter the curvature of space-time. And because of that, you're actually not so much propelling yourself forward as you are reducing the distance. And it is a variable that has vast ability to a vast level of compression or expansion. So if you want to imagine, let's say you could, like a god, control gravity or control the curvature of our space-time. You could create a craft that has a virtual black hole in front of you. And your craft will immediately move towards that black hole. And how much that, how near you are to that singularity will increase the curvature of space-time to a dramatic degree. Now, let's say you are perpetually creating this black hole at a fixed distance in front of you. Boom, you're taken off and you're gone. And because you're following together. So in a layman's terms, that's a quick and simple, I should say, that's a simplified understanding of one possibility. The physics I've explored haven't really touched on wormholes as much, but I understand that is something in the zeitgeist. Yeah.
I would think it would take a massive amount of power to generate a black hole right in front of your ship.
Yes, it normally does take. So if you want to alter the curvature of space-time to the level of like a planet like Jupiter, because that's normally how you alter space-time. You just take matter and you keep cramming more and more mass into the same space, and that creates that curvature in space-time. If you want that level of space-time curvature, you need a planet the size of Jupiter to create that. And Neil deGrasse Tyson would definitely agree with me on that.
Mm-hmm.
But a little known equation, well, a well-known equation that most people aren't familiar with is Einstein's general relativity equation that covers the curvature of space-time. It is, and it's featured in my book by Dr. Jack Sarfati. And in it, he explores how the speed of light determines how much energy and mass, because we know mass and energy are interchangeable, it determines how much energy is required to alter the curvature of space-time. So the fascinating thing that Dr. Sarfati came to realize is if you can alter the speed of light and slow it down, the amount of energy required greatly diminishes the slower it gets. So imagine you have a non-human intelligence that can synthesize a craft using metamaterials. So we're getting into the weeds a little bit already, I can see. Let me back up a little bit. We already know we can slow down the speed of light in everyday terms. If you ever drop a pencil into a glass of water, you'll notice that pencil makes a line this way and then curves the other direction. That's called refraction. And what's happening there is as photons hit the water, they're slowed down in that substrate. And it even happens, the speed of light is slowed by almost 33% in glass. And that's why you have, these different effects from lenses. So imagine that you could produce a metamaterial that could slow the speed of light down to a ridiculous sum. Like the speed of light could be reduced to like 3 centimeters a second. The amount of energy required to alter space-time then suddenly dwindles down to like a car battery.
Do you think that there are motherships out there that are doing this, and the UFOs that we see on the planet or in the air around here are like little scout ships?
That's one of I have a section on conjecture, and that was one topic we discussed. If you look at the craft discussed by the first whistleblower, Bob Lazar, he termed that the sport model.
Yes.
Bob explains that on board that craft, there are no bathrooms. There's no stocks or larders of food and anything to eat with. So essentially, I postulate that the sport model is a car because you can get in it and you can travel for a couple of hours. And assuming that the occupants are biological like you or I, they consume things and they produce waste. So if that is a truth, then more than likely a mothership would be a logical possibility. I also cite several other possibilities. The occupants could be artificial intelligent biologics, which could be avatars or just pure artificial intelligence. It could be that their home base is relatively close by, maybe here on Earth, or perhaps they can open up a wormhole to their own dimension and just pop out. But yeah, a mothership is also a possibility. There could be a mothership that we, outside the Earth, they could zip to relatively quickly. With the kind of gravity-driven physics surrounding these vehicles, maneuvering anywhere within our own solar system is relatively easy.
Well, you speak about Bob Lazar in your book. For those watching that don't know a lot about Bob's story, can you fill in the blanks for them?
Sure. So David Grush is currently our preeminent whistleblower, and I applaud what he is doing. He is doing it by the book and doing it properly. So, and that's why he is proving to be so effective. But if some of us were around back in 1989 when Bob Lazar came out as an unofficial whistleblower, one that didn't do things by the book, and the whole system turned against him strongly. Not to say that the system isn't turning against David Grush, but it's proving less effective, we'll just say. But in 1989, Bob Lazar first interviewed with George Knapp in Las Vegas television under anonymity at first, that he was a scientist that had been working at a top secret facility no one had ever heard of before called Area 51. And that he had been contracted to back engineer non-human intelligence, extra whatever craft. So, and over the course of that year, eventually Bob revealed his identity to the public. And the fascinating part about Bob and his colorful history, despite all of that, is he put forward his full understanding and theories around how that craft works as best he could. And the whole smear campaign went into full effect against Bob. And Bob made an easy target for a lot of it. So a lot of people will ask me if I believe in Bob Lazar and all that. And I say, it's not really about belief for me. I could care less if he has a degree from MIT or not. I say, let's not focus so much on the personality, but what is the science that he puts forward? And so I look at the data and I examine the data, and I also collaborated. I should say I collected, not collaborated. I collected information from another physicist in Australia, Dr. Ricardo Stiordi, not doctor, but Ricardo Stiordi. And there was a lot of fascinating science in Bob's theories that Bob himself did not understand. There were certain frequencies that his craft worked under that was outside his field of expertise. But Ricardo, with his particular field of physics, suddenly put those puzzle pieces together and they made like astounding sense. The likelihood that Bob could come up with the numbers that he did and turn out to be accurate, he'd be more likely to win one of our state lotteries.
What I think is cool about Bob's story is that he may have been the first person talking about element 115 before it became public.
Yes. And that is discussed in detail within the book, where I break down how element 115 works. And it's interesting when I first became familiar with the whole thing, because at that time it was still rather a vague concept, and a lot of people would probably reach the same understanding that I had at the moment, that this was just like some magic material that just hit all these buttons. But if you take the time and you delve into the details, you understand the concept of what was presented. Um, at that time in 1989, that level of the periodic chart hadn't been filled yet. I think it came in, I want to say off the top of my head, around the year 2000, and was through a particle collider in Moscow that they finally synthesized a few molecules of it that existed for a fraction of a second. So, of course, most people would say, well, see, it just doesn't work. That element isn't real. It just falls apart immediately. But that's a knee-jerk reaction with a limited understanding about how synthesized particles are created. And the simple solution for that one is you can use a particle collider to create an element of gold if you want. You can fuse different protons and neutrons, and you can create gold. The problem is gold comes in 41 different isotopes, but only one isotope is stable. All of the rest of them immediately degrade into other elements. So to sit there and say that element 115 can't be real because it falls apart shows a lack of understanding about how these things are manufactured.
Do you think Bob actually has a sample of that somewhere, and that's why he's still around?
That's a fascinating question. He could, but he could just as easily. I could see a motivation for why he would want to say he has it, so that's one more piece of leverage to keep the government at bay. But yeah, I mean, I would definitely see the tempt if you could actually slip out with one of those ingots and have it for yourself. Oh man, I would be so tempted. But yeah, he could go either way. He could have it, he couldn't have it. There's a benefit in either direction.
It's my understanding of Bob's story that the reason he left is because the government was keeping an eye on him and they knew about his wife's extramarital affair. And he got upset about that and quit or something.
Well, I can clarify that one right out. So what happened was Bob was just having the time of his life as a physicist at Area S4, which is actually, I mean, Area 51 is a really big piece of real estate. And the part that most people consider 51 is kind of well documented, but the lab that Bob worked in was called Area S4 and was several miles southwest of the main base. So Bob was having a fantastic time for months, just trying to wrap his brain around this Easter egg from the cosmos. And he would get calls from his home in Las Vegas and be on a Janet flight and have to get out there within a moment's notice. But after about 4 months, those calls stopped coming. And there was no explanation why. And after weeks and weeks of no more calls, he started to worry. Bob was like, well, considering everything they showed me, are they going to let me just continue to walk around knowing what I know? And he didn't understand why they weren't calling. So that's what led him down the path to bring in his confidants, his people that worked with him in order to kind of line everything up, his friends. And he drove them out in his RV to show them, hey, look, if anything happens to me and I disappear, this is exactly what I was researching. Come see at nighttime these craft flying around for yourself. On the third occasion that they did that, they got caught. And during an interrogation, it came to Bob's revelation. The whole reason they had stopped calling him was because his phone lines at home were tapped. Now, Bob knew his phone lines were tapped when he signed up to participate in the program, and his wife didn't. And so those that were listening in on the conversation understood that his wife was having an affair with a flight instructor. And they wanted to basically hold off on letting Bob continue his research until whatever shook out in his personal life. And that's what brought everything to a head.
Do you think that the government has been successful in reverse engineering a craft and has one that works?
Wow, that's another fascinating question. And it's fascinating on several different levels. I would say there's a likelihood that, well, there's a strong likelihood that many of the technologies that we use today are derivative technologies that stemmed from some of the back engineering that started from the 1950s, et cetera. There is reasonable understanding that some of the more advanced physics were cracked, and a strong understanding that the alteration of space-time curvature is a reality. What also makes it interesting, and you could see where people could understand on either side of that fence, does our government have this technology and keeping it a secret, or does our government not understand what's going on? Does the Pentagon know it's happening and they don't know how to recreate it, and therefore they don't want to disclose that either? I would put it to you that there are a section of uh, private contractors and government agencies that are aware, that do understand how this technology works. Some of them have access to their own man-made versions. And then there's a huge swath of government agencies that have no idea and are intentionally kept in the dark. And like, uh, just as a possibility, like the United States Navy, they see these technologies happening all the time and they don't understand what's going on. And it worries them, and maybe they don't want to go too far down that road to show how much they don't know. So you have the right hand and the left hand not speaking to each other, which is a common everyday thing within governments.
Well, let's say that there are recovered craft or craft that have been reverse engineered. How could you understand the difference between one of those and one that belongs to an ET?
That one's an easy question, believe it or not. So the major difference is NHI craft, or non-human intelligence craft, are created using primarily metamaterials. Imagine, for instance, back in 1989, Bob Lazar characterized his sport model as looking like it was created in wax, heated up a little bit, and all the surfaces kind of melded together into one solid craft, so that there were no seams, there were no 90-degree angles on surfaces. Everything looked like it was just brought into being all at once. So back then, they'd never heard of metamaterials. That term was not coined until 1999. Metamaterials are, well, I won't go too far into detail on that, but he would also characterize it as saying that now, if he, instead of saying created by wax, if he were to talk about it today, he would say, well, we might 3D print a vehicle like that. Now imagine a 3D printer that can, instead of creating a little line and going back and forth and making each layer, imagine a 3D printer that just makes things on an atomic level, molecule by molecule. So there you have a craft that has no seams, no bolts, no rivets, no wiring, nothing like electronics that you'd be familiar with, versus craft that clearly have plates outside that are bolted on or painted over, that have sections that can be removed. So you have seamless and non-seamless. The non-seamless ones would be man-made.
Well, that makes sense. I never thought about it that way.
Yeah, we don't have the capabilities, the material science to build such advanced technology. If, for instance, if you were to travel back in time to the Pharaoh's courts in Egypt and present to them a steel sword, they would be immediately amazed at how incredibly strong and even a little flexible steel is, because everything they used was made with iron, and they would have no idea how to manufacture a substance like steel. That's where we are on the level of metamaterials. And I mean, I would say we are probably decades, if not a century away from crafting material on that scale. Now, is it possible that a genius could come down the road tomorrow and make a breakthrough? Sure.
Your answer may make a lot of scientists angry, but do you think that a lot of our advancements in technology are from ETs, like fiber optics, the internet, touchscreens, and more?
I don't think it would make too many people angry. Uh, I mean, just look at the level of technological growth in the last 80 years. Prior to that, technological growth was tedious. It was slow. And then Isaac Newton came along and things began to accelerate. But still, we're talking about hundreds of years that things steadily advanced. And the technology that people were born with, and what the technological growth it was by the end of their lives, wasn't that dissimilar. But now I look at the astounding level of technological growth just in my own lifetime, and it's phenomenal on so many different levels. So how much of that might have come from that technology? I understand fiber optics is a possibility, that some of these crafts introduced the idea, and then Corning back engineered that and realized the versatility and use of it. I mean, you got to realize that if you were handed this uh, alien craft with just astounding capabilities, it's going to take you a while to understand even some of the simplest things. But along the way, you're going to gain inspiration, understanding, as you chip at the little bits and pieces, the accessories, or whatever, the little side parts. One of the things that Bob Lazar joked about with his sport model was the only thing that he fully understood was the floor panels in the craft. It turned out that there was a section of the craft near the door where it was completely flat, solid. You could walk on the surface whenever you wanted to. But if you stuck your finger into this little hole and slid it back, the floor would suddenly break up into individual slices and fold itself backwards to create an opening where you could go down into the lower level. And he's like, that was the only thing to him that made total sense, because it reminded him of cardboard beer bottle separators that we used back in the 80s and 70s.
Everyone has cell phones these days. What can we do to make the most of using them for sightings?
A lot of people will discuss, like, hey, everyone has a cell phone these days. How come there's just not evidence everywhere? Anytime any craft shows up, you're going to have 100 cell phones that are going to pop out and record that, right? Some of my favorite science figures have made that statement. First, I would say, don't zoom in. Hopefully you've got a nice quality camera. You can get HD quality, and a few probably even get 4K. Don't zoom in on your craft if you can. It's best to frame it with like ground effects, trees, radio antennas, anything in the background. So that way, when someone wants to examine the data, they have something they can compare it to gauge size and distance, that sort of thing. I mean, I'm not going to tell you don't zoom in at all, but make sure you have a locked in, good, solid thing. And maybe the majority of it might be like that. And then if you want to zoom in later, that's fine too. And at nighttime, I'm sorry, cell phone cameras are not going to record good quality video at nighttime. I use professional grade cameras with my day job, and oftentimes nighttime footage is still a struggle there where we require additional lighting. The other factor you have to understand is if you are dealing with a craft that is altering the curvature of space-time around it, you're not going to get crisp, clean video of that craft unless the occupants want you to. They can make that vehicle, they can alter the curvature of space-time around it so that the photons, the light traveling around it, can be as fuzzy as they want or can be flat out invisible. It's all basically how they tune the modulation of light as it traverses around it.
Do you think that some of those ships are sometimes not even in our dimension? They're like popping in and out of our dimension?
Well, I'm not going to discount that, but oftentimes you'll hear witnesses testify that they instantly vanish, that they're there and then they're gone. Part of with a gravity-driven craft, an issue with that is going to be, it's not just creating the a compressed curvature in space-time that produces incredible speed. Anytime you alter the curvature of space, you're also altering time. So if you compress space, you're compressing time as well. So for the occupants inside, it's probably just a steady acceleration. They honestly don't even feel the acceleration at all. But for those outside, it's instantaneous. It's also why they can suddenly move and then come to a complete stop without appearing to slow down. Now, those inside probably do reduce speed, but for those outside witnessing, time is being altered as well, and that's why they instantly appear.
Can you break down what you mean by altering the curve of space-time?
Ooh, let's see. So our understanding of gravity, it was recently presented that gravity does travel as waves through LIGO. That's a fascinating observatory. There's two of them actually, and but traditionally through history, we always viewed gravity as a force that pulled us down to the earth. You know, what goes up must come down. I would say gravity isn't as much a force as it is an affect of space-time itself. So imagine that you've seen lots of computer graphics where space-time is visualized as a grid, you know, a three-dimensional grid where uh, there's a law that basically says once you put an object in motion, it continues to stay in motion at that speed unless it's acted upon. So if you toss a marble into space, it's going to keep traveling at that speed forever because there's no friction to slow it down. And it's just going to stay in a perfect straight line that whole way. But as that marble happens centuries later or thousands of years later, it travels near a star. Because of the mass of that star, there's so much mass in a star that it causes those straight grid lines to begin to curve towards the mass. And from the marble's perspective, it's traveling in a straight line forever. But that straight line now curves towards the sun. So in effect, that's what gravity is. As we get closer to massive objects, space itself actually compresses around those massive objects, and we're traveling down our straight line towards that curvature.
You've taken physics in college. I've taken it in college. I don't remember the exact calculation for gravity, but I thought it was mass times acceleration and the speed of light. I can't remember. Maybe you can pull it up. Do you remember what that is? The actual mathematical calculation for it?
I do have it right here. Ah, and I could probably send this to you as a separate graphic if you like.
It's in your book?
But yeah, that is the equation for the curvature of light, or the curvature of space-time, sorry, where c is the speed of light.
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you're showing me the right one. Can you just tell me that? I looked like it was RU something. I thought it was G equals C times something.
Well, that's in there. It's G over C to the fourth.
Mm-hmm.
8 pi G over C to the fourth.
8 pi C. Okay. Boy, it's been a long time.
And that I do go into it. I could go ahead and read that to you real quick. Well, I don't remember my some of these symbols are a little Latin-y for me. But yeah, that topic is explained in detail throughout that chapter with that would be under the Jack Sarfati chapter.
All right. We'll leave it at that.
Other vehicles I do touch on besides the sport model is Mark McCandlish's Fluxliner. I also touch on Salvatore Paius's inertial mass reduction vehicle, where we break that down in the physics that cover it. I also even go back in time a little bit and do a little research on the Avro car, which was built in Canada, a failed attempt at a flying saucer.
A lot of people still don't believe in UFOs. How would you dispel their disbelief?
I think for the most part, even if the president of the United States came out and said, we're not alone, a huge chunk of society is still not going to accept that. It doesn't matter if it's the current president or the next president, there's always going to be some pushback, what we now call ontological shock. And that is that people go about their lives, they struggle to, put dinner on the table, they go to work, they try to have successful businesses and launch different ventures. And there is a comfort level in understanding your world and working within those parameters. And there is a strong resistance to suddenly have that paradigm overturned and you have to look at the world through brand new perspectives. And knowing there's a confidence that comes with being at the top of the food chain and suddenly realizing you're not even close to the top makes a lot of people nervous. I know very intelligent people that I converse with every day that fall back on ridicule and just the comedy of the situation as a defensive way of protecting their comfort zone. But for those that are willing to risk exploring these principles, if you do happen to check out my book, you will see that what we've been told is impossible really isn't.
Can you tell us about some of the declassified UFO incidents that are out there?
Yeah, I have a couple different chapters on that. There's a chapter on orbs. There's also a chapter devoted towards the Tic Tac gimbal and the Go Fast videos. Basically, the famous those three from Navy all work under the same kind of gravitational technologies. Um, the fascinating part is all of these different vehicles. You have a kaleidoscope of shapes and physical craft. There's just no limit to what kind of craft they can make because they are not governed by aerodynamics. When you can create your own pocket space-time, you can have whatever shape you feel like. And Their ability to move without sonic booms is primarily due to the fact that they're altering space-time and not necessarily cutting through the air. And because of that curvature of space-time, they can easily maneuver under the water without creating a splash as they enter.
When you say moving through space-time, would you say it's more like appearing, disappearing, and then reappearing somewhere else?
Those are all options. I mean, to the outside viewer, that is definitely a thing that they can do. They can, like, I've heard, like, for instance, Bob Lazar's, when they took their RV out there, they basically characterized that the craft that they witnessed was doing these stair-step maneuvers, where they were making 90-degree turns and moving like this instantly. So they're the outside observers watching, and because time is being compressed, these vehicles are within their own pocket reality. There's no inertia. So being able to move in right angles is no problem. Stop, start instantly, no problem. Being able to disappear and reappear, again, they could disappear and reappear because they alter the modulation of their craft and the photons suddenly become invisible, or they could disappear simply because they move so fast that they're gone. And then they reappear because they move so fast that they can just stop.
Do you think that these non-human intelligences come from a planet where element 115 naturally exists, just like on our planet, magnetite exists?
Excellent. Yes, that is also covered in the Bob Lazar chapter. So, like I disputed earlier, the particle collider misnomer, Bob puts forward that on our planet, in our solar system, we live in a very quiet neighborhood of the Milky Way galaxy. Our star is a very typical, stable star that is not massive, it is not huge. And it was birthed, our star isn't an original star that came with the creation of the universe. Our star is the result of other stars supernovaing, dumping their guts into the universe, forming new nebula clouds that then coalesced into new stars and new planets. It's why you have, the oxygen that you breathe, the iron in your blood. These all came from previously dead stars that regurgitated their guts into the universe and formed new solar systems. So consider the fact that we live in such a stable, quiet neighborhood. Go pop in deeper into the Milky Way galaxy where there are more massive, monstrous stars that can collapse into huge, gigantic supernovas. Those stars, as they reach their dying stages, they fuse first hydrogen to helium and then helium into other heavier elements. And where a star like ourselves stops at iron, upon supernova, it throws out its guts, but more massive, huge stars are going to create heavier and heavier elements like uranium and plutonium and things like that. So it is possible that a stable form of element 115 could be naturally occurring in a neighborhood of the galaxy where these more massive stars once existed and died. And so I'll put it to you another fascinating thought experiment. Imagine you were that world's version of Isaac Newton. And one day you came across a rock that exhibited principles of anti-gravity. You might start studying that rock, learn how to purify it, manufacture it, and develop a whole chain of technology without ever needing to touch a fossil fuel. So you could run all your technology or a good chunk of your technology on this element, and it would achieve astounding things. To you, that would be normal because that's what you came to understand. And so it's possible that some of these non-intelligent societies that exist outside of us are actually near peer civilizations to our own, but they took a different path of technology than we did. And now they're showing up and going, look at what these crazy apes are doing with organic fuels and shooting stuff out their butts.
In your opinion, why do you think the government is not releasing all the information they have on the UAPs?
It's not in their best interest. Like I was saying before, you have a huge swath of the government that doesn't understand what's going on, and they don't want to reveal their lack of understanding. That is not in their interest as an intelligence agency, as a protective force for our own society. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have possible private contractors that have gained a huge technological advantage on not only other competitors, but other governments. And and as long as they have that advantage in their back pocket, it's all theirs, and they can profit from that in their own self-interest. You also have intelligence agencies that have like-minded mentalities as well. If, again, this is all on an if, because I don't know one way or the other.
Have you looked at the mass sighting of the Phoenix Lights? And if so, do you think it was a TR-3B?
Good question. It's possible it was a TR-3B. Partly, that vehicle is also covered in my book, and the size of the TR-3B would be respective to that sighting. A future book I would like to work on, I'd like to collaborate with some forensic psychologists to discuss the different phenomena and what the implications that arise from these encounters and observations. The trick is going to be not to try not to anthropomorphize or humanize everything from our perspective, which is a really difficult challenge when all you are is a human. Several different things are covered on the TR-3B. Such a craft is so classified that what theories I do have on the topic, I do find debatable, highly debatable. So, and I state in the chapter that that is definitely a topic that I will re-examine in the future should more information come out.
I don't know how much you consume media, especially video platforms, but have you seen the video out there where Tucker Carlson is talking to another news person, and they are both confirming that there are deep, dark elements of the UFO world that they won't even tell their spouses about?
You have two different camps in this and how they view non-human intelligence. You have the benevolent understanding of people like Dr. Stephen Greer, and then you have the other side of the equation that sees these societies as a potential threat. Now, a threat isn't necessarily intent. Having birds flying around an airport and getting sucked into an engine is a threat. That doesn't mean the birds wanted to do that. But when you have these vehicles impinging on restricted airspace, that is a threat. And when they are tampering nuclear weapons facilities, that is most clearly a threat. Now, is it with malice? We don't know. There has been instances where cattle mutilation implies one thing, but there's also been rare cases where humans have also been discovered in similar conditions. What's going on there? I would say, if I had to venture my own speculation, would be other societies are simply other societies. There are good and there are bad elements to many of them. Hopefully the good outweighs the other parts.
Right. Out of all your research, what have you discovered that has been the most mind-blowing for you?
Oh, there's so many elements that can boggle the mind, and especially when you get into quantum mechanics and Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. and how it relates to all these different things. Um, and I do believe that that uncertainty principle is one day going to fall apart. It's just that at our current human level of understanding, we're not capable of understanding what creates that uncertainty. We just don't have the perception ability to see what's really going on. Because as human beings, we have a very narrow window from which our brains can handle the universe around us. We see in such a limited visual range on the whole electromagnetic spectrum. It is just a fraction of what is there. We know, ultraviolet, but we can't see it. We know there's gamma rays. We don't see that. Our brain can't really, it's not wired to see all of that. We know that we hear a limited range of sound, but cats and dogs and birds, they hear a wider range of sounds. And touching at least lightly into the woo, there's every reason to believe that there is a psychic level to the universe that for the vast majority of human beings, we have no access to, that we don't understand what's going on. And in a future book, I will begin exploring that possibility.
Well, once again, your book is called UFO Science, Secret New Physics, Vehicles, and UAPs. Why have we switched from the word UFO to UAP?
I would equate it to simply covert terminology. People within government agencies, within the Department of Defense and Department of Energy, wanted to be able to discuss the topic amongst each other without all the giggles and snickers and things like that, so that others wouldn't also understand the discussion. So the simple term UAP came out. Initially, it was unidentified aerial phenomena, but today it's been adjusted to unidentified anomalous phenomena, because we're talking about multiple mediums: space, air, and sea. And solids, if you want to go there.
Wow. Outside of selling this book, what do you hope to achieve with this series?
So, yeah, my real goal is just to open minds, to understand that we've been fed a whole bunch of propaganda for the last 80 years that UFOs, nothing to see here, it's not real, go away, none of this is possible, go about your business, and, feel comfortable putting bread on the table. But the truth is, they've been withholding information for their own reasons. And all the things that we've been told are impossible really are not. I hope that people that pick up the book, you don't have to agree with everything in there. And I'm not saying that the information provided in that book is 100% true. What I did is I brought together all these different physics theories from different science figures, made it digestible, understandable for you, so that you can look at the science, see for yourself if the information presented is plausible, and decide for yourself. And along the way, open up your mind to the possibilities.
If I was a senior in high school and I was looking at colleges, what courses should I take if I wanted to break into the UAP world?
I'd say that really depends on the avenue that you want to pursue. If you want to go the academic course, there's definitely fields that you could study. Let's see here. Well, for example, Eric Weinstein would probably steer you to Stony Brook University. They have a very intense program around the subject of gravity, and their physics field is top notch with some stellar professors that most people are not aware of. You want to get into high particle physics, general relativity, quantum mechanics. But there's also the other avenue where you could explore government aspect. We're getting into fields of intelligence. Regardless of what path you take, physics is definitely going to be a key component. So David Grush, for example, has a bachelor's degree in physics as well as his extensive military career.
Well, after watching this podcast, people may want to reach out to you personally and ask you questions. Are you open to that?
Sure. They could come to my website, geoturnerwrites.com, and they can email me through there. And of course, feel free to check out my other books while you're at it, if you like. If you're into different kinds of fictions, and I will be releasing future UFO science books, hopefully by the end of this year as well.
Oh, great. Are you working on anything else?
I'm currently gathering research on the second book that's going to revolve around communication.
As a TV producer and director, have you ever considered doing some kind of UFO material for the television?
I haven't considered it yet, but if the opportunity was presented, I would definitely be open to it.
Well, before we finish up, can you leave us with one last positive message?
Oh, wow. There's just so many different things I could touch on. But if you're looking for peace of mind for those people, let's say you're someone that is just kind of coming into this subject, and it's unnerving to realize the possibility that we are not at the top of that food chain, and that there are other societies that are so far advanced to us. A lot of people think about how Western Europe conquered America and brought in their technologies and devastated the native populations. And so there is a natural fear that these other more advanced societies would just reinforce their beliefs onto us and devastate our own societies. I would say a simple thing to keep in mind. This phenomena has been going on not just for decades or centuries, but there's every reason to believe there's evidence that goes back for centuries or millennia. And the societies out there are so far advanced beyond us. If at any point in time they wanted to overrun us, it could have happened at any moment, and it simply hasn't. So I don't see that, Independence Day scenario happening anytime soon.
Gary, thank you for your message and thank you for being my guest. I hope to see you back when your new book comes out.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. It's been a great discussion.
Thanks for watching the JeffMara podcast. I really appreciate you. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. And if you do, there are loyalty badges and other perks depending on your level of membership. All you need to do is click the join button underneath the video to find out more. Thank you for your support.